Awesome. Thanks all for joining today's all remote group conversation. We appreciate you taking time to join. The slides are in the agenda doc as well as the What's Happening channel. And so we will dive into questions. Looks like Jamie Rachel has the first one and currently the only one. So if anybody is joining, you want to ask a question, feel free to document under that or verbalize, and we can document after the fact. Jamie, are you here?
I don't see her.
No worries. I'll verbalize Jamie's question. So Jamie said, as a newbie to GitLab, as a new labber, do you have any tips on how to unlearn corporate norms and how to adapt to the GitLab all remote culture? I love this question. First off, welcome to GitLab. Thank you so much for joining the team. So I'll start with this. Looking for ways to implement our sub-values is where I would start. Our sub-values are fascinating. Our values are words you've probably heard before, things like collaboration, iteration, results. But the truth is those words can mean different things to different people. And what is very special about GitLab is we have sub-values, which act as substantiators that really spell out in granular detail what we mean by iteration and collaboration. So there's very little guesswork. We do all of that work for you, and it's grown over the time that I've been here. Look at those sub-values. Some of them are incredibly profound. Short toes, no ego, blameless problem solving, everything is in draft. Those give you actionable ways to go about your day-to-day and how you approach your work. I really love short toes. No one can step on anyone's toes because we all have short toes. That creates a psychologically safe atmosphere where everyone can contribute. So I would say dig into the values. I reference them every single day in every work decision that I make. And a lot of the values specifically tell you how to unlearn some of the corporate norms. Short toes is a great one. I'm sure you've been in a corporate environment where you'll hear someone say, swim in your own lane, or this isn't your department, make sure you stay over there. Short toes goes exactly counter to that. And that is exactly what we hope to achieve. I'll also say, check out public Slack channels, issues, and epics. Watch people work. I was fascinated when I joined the company that I could just peek my head into any other department and see how they were working. And I would say, pay close attention to the thanks channel and what values are lived out in discretionary bonuses. So our team member updates channel, you'll see discretionary bonuses being handed out every single week. Pay attention to what values people were nominated for. It usually gives you some indication of how a value was lived out. And I found it pretty easy to reverse engineer when I saw other people living out those values. So once you get on that, you'll become the reverse engineer for people who will join after you. I'd also say develop a reflexive instinct to old ways. So if you catch yourself defaulting to a meeting or any other old corporate norm, that should act as a trigger to question it and reference the handbook or ask someone else, is there a different way or an elevated way to approach this? And the last thing that I'll mention here is be the change you want to see. So for example, it's a little awkward when I remind people in a Slack channel to not use @here or @channel, or to continue conversations in a thread instead of just right under each other. But this is in our handbook. These are our communication guidelines, and they're there so that it's easier to communicate and there's an understood way to do it. And really it's the only way people learn. And I see that Jessica is adding a point here as well. Jessica on the all remote team. So I'll hand it over to her for other tips.
Yeah, as I was listening, I was also just thinking, it's good to give it time. This is a strong culture here, and a lot of us came from strong cultures, and it does take time to sort of shift your ways of working, ways of thinking. But what is wonderful about this particular team is that people will actively guide you. So you don't have to, fit in right away or change yourself. Give yourself the time and space to observe, to learn, to challenge yourself, and trust that your team members will help you and support you and guide you. I think that's a very important part of the culture here that has been extremely helpful for me. So yeah, give yourself the time and let it sink in.
Awesome. Here to that. Looks like Christy has the second question.
I do. As more companies go remote, I'm seeing more products that offer employee monitoring. Just this morning, I got an email from a vendor wanting me to talk to them about monitoring GitLab's employees, which obviously I didn't even open. I've also heard companies talk about how uncomfortable it is not to know what their employees are doing. So I've talked to them about, you got to trust people and look at results. But this seems like a really big problem. I see why this idea might be appealing to companies that are not used to working in this way. At the same time, it's toxic. And I feel like we are really well positioned to help shape a story around why this is not a good idea. So I'm curious, what are we doing on this front?
Yeah, love that. Well articulated. We are in the beginnings of creating the de facto remote playbook. So for those who have been here for a year, we did a remote playbook last year. It was an MVC, a quick iteration, bundling up all of the all remote guides that we had and essentially laying it out as one key PDF asset. That essentially collected all of GitLab's proven principles on how to work remotely. But this year we have this massive opportunity not to just write GitLab's remote playbook, but the remote playbook by GitLab. And there's a big difference between the two. We have earned the authority in the space to show the world how to do this. And to some degree, we feel a responsibility to do that. So what are we doing right now? I'm in panels, interviews, webinars, talking with academics, building case studies with some of the top universities in the world every single day. And this question comes up a lot. And what I am doing is pulling out pieces of the handbook and showing how GitLab focuses on results. It's not about the time that you spend. It's all about the results. And for me, I try to boil it down to a boring solution. I'll ask a manager, how did you know someone was working in the office? If you were just looking at them and assuming they were working, that wasn't a good approach to begin with. So really, the manager and the direct need to both be able to have clarity on what does success look like. It's really as simple as that. And so the message that I'm giving leaders who are transitioning is ask your team that question. What does success look like? And if both sides can't answer that, then you have to go back to the drawing board and actually figure out what metrics you want to measure. But the real shakeup here is once those metrics are defined, a lot of organizations are not so comfortable letting their direct reports say, here are the tools, technologies, and communication workflows I need to achieve that goal. It removes a lot of the subjectivity, and this is a bit of an uncomfortable conversation where the power is shifting more towards the people. It's democratizing in many ways. I think it's a great thing, but I do see companies struggling with it who have gotten to where they are through this kind of command and control type of atmosphere. Managers in a remote setting are less directors and more unblockers. You just have to be open to feedback and let your people come to you and tell you what they need you to unblock for them. And if they're coming to you and you create a psychologically safe atmosphere where they can tell you what they need unblocked, and then you as a manager will unblock them and let them run really fast. That's the ideal utopian state, but a lot of companies have a long way to go to get there. And especially if their default is to think about monitoring, there's a lot of mental shifting that has to take place. And I think we will take advantage of the platform that we have to reinforce just how important trust is. Jessica, did you have anything to add on that? Oh, Christy, go ahead if you wanted to add context.
Yeah, I would say I would love to see, because GitLab's being featured in national articles all the time in the context of remote. I would love to see us have an article or something where we really talk about this, because I've seen articles talking about the shift towards this, but I haven't seen anybody come out and really say like, hey, this is a bad idea. Here's why. Here's all the things you just talked about. Here's how you can do it differently. And I think that could have a really meaningful impact on work culture.
I will say, I think there's a slide in the deck. Last June, we were interviewed by CNBC along with maybe 10 other people. And the context of that interview was they wanted to get the full spectrum of where people landed on employee monitoring or not. So there are some people in that video that actually sold the employee monitoring services, and they gave all the reasons why. And then they talked to me. So I do have a moment in that video where it's like the GitLab approach seems vastly different to that. And at last count, that CNBC video had over 700,000 views on YouTube. So that's a great start. And we can link that here in the agenda. But I totally agree with that. And this is something that I'll take to our external comms team, and I think we can run with it. Zach, I see you're typing there. Did you want to add anything on this question before we jump to the next?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that we do really well is talking about the difficult and the hard things about working remote and not just the positive. And I think in terms of where this question originated, I think you can also advocate that people may actually work longer or harder being remote. Whether that's the fact that you have more opportunity, you're home, maybe you're working a 12-hour day, 7 to 7, and doing things in the middle of your day. But because of that flexibility and opportunity that's provided through remote work, it's not always encouraging less work.
Yeah,
It's a great question. A great point.
Yeah, I've gotten to bring that up. The point that I've made is we have the opposite problem of what companies think they're going to have, in which we are actively encouraging people not to overwork, because that is more of the tendency when people go remote. And then that's our responsibility to them as leaders to say, hey, look, I see how productive you are. That's awesome. You have to take care of yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I linked, we have a handbook page on the nonlinear workday, Zach, and I have to continually remind myself that this is somewhat of a understood principle here, but for many people, it is a completely foreign concept that you could just disappear for hours in a day and rearrange your day and still be productive. For many people, the default of that is the definition of slacking off instead of the definition of ultimate productivity and flexibility. So it's always a good reminder that we have to meet people where they are and explain some of these concepts that we are fortunate to some degree take for granted and we've internalized in a lot of ways. Jessica, you had the next point.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and just say we released a report this week, actually, where we started talking to people who are working remotely around the world and asking them what they're doing, how they're designing their work life. And a lot of people came back with this question of like, I'm working too hard. I don't know how to set boundaries between my work and life. I think what we've noticed from last year to this year is that where last year the conversation about remote work was, can people do it? Can they be productive? Now the conversation is becoming, are we burning ourselves out? And I think that is something we can really, really dig into because it is affecting everyone. It's global, and now we've all seen it firsthand. So I think that's where this fits in. Employers need to start thinking about how to give their team members more space, because ultimately, yeah, we do work harder when we're working remotely. And it's really not a question of whether people are working at all. It's a question of whether they are happy and whether they're able to sustain it over a long period of time without burning out.
And Christy, I actually just looked back through my slides and actually don't see that CNBC video. So my apologies there. I will add it in, and I'm linking it now in the agenda doc. It's a few minutes, but I would say take a look at that. It definitely encompasses the global conversation on it. And you'll notice the GitLab section takes a hard right turn, but it's one you want to root for. Awesome. David, looks like you have the next question.
All right. So I know that you talk to many other organizations as well, either to help them with questions about going all remote or to learn from them, to develop new synergies. I'd be interested to know which other organizations you've outside of GitLab you find are going all remote in what you would think of a remarkable way as well, and also if there's anything that we can learn from them.
Yeah, this is a great question. I will say the vast majority of organizations that I've seen are going hybrid. There's a small list of those that I'm aware of that are going all remote. Most of the ones I know that are going all remote are very small. Skift, S-K-I-F-T, is a phenomenal travel publication, but they're a relatively small team. They had an office in New York. I'm friends with the editor there, and he was talking to me early on. He said, I think we're just going to let the lease expire and we'll figure out how to do this. It's a lot easier for a smaller team. There's a lot less wheels in motion. There's a lot less legacy to undo. I think the jury is still out on companies that are transitioning all remote and getting completely away from the office. But I will say what I'm really encouraged is a lot of companies are shifting away from the office mentality. So although the physical office space may continue to exist, Shopify is a great example of this. They're calling their approach digital first, I think it is. And they're going to maintain one key office, but I suspect they'll probably just turn it into like an experiential museum where they hang their awards up. It's less about where work gets done. That's pretty cool. I think if they can pull that off, they're already a public company, strong growth, strong numbers, but they were very co-located, and they hired a team that was bought into that culture, and now they're shifting that culture in a major way. So I'm excited to watch them. That's one that comes to mind. We also have a transition and hybrid remote handbook page, and I'm actively tracking companies that are transitioning to hybrid. And I have a section there on blueprints for companies that are doing it well. So it's more hybrid. As I get more companies that are going all remote, we should probably have a blueprint section on all remote. HubSpot is another great example that comes to mind. They're definitely going hybrid, and they're being very intentional about it, but the intentionality is worth praising. And building in public, I've been very encouraged by how many companies are building in public. I want to give one other shout out to Dropbox. They're calling their approach virtual first, and they're looking at the organizational design principles in how they make this shift. And actually, our handbook was made better by some of their early virtual first principles. I was reading their early communication guide, and they had a section on examples of things to say when you want to decline a meeting in favor of async. So they literally gave people copy and pastable nuggets to decline a meeting in favor of async. I thought this was brilliant because it shifts the burden from the person. There's no awkward spinning of what is this person going to think if I decline the meeting? Will they see it as a personal affront? Takes all of that aside and says, no, this is because it's more respectful of your time if we can do this in an asynchronous way. So we adapted that, modified that, and added that to our handbook, and of course gave them credit.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jessica, for the great notes.
Yes. Thank you very much for that, Jessica. Josh, on to you.
Cool. I think I got the next one. Wore my jacket just for this meeting. No, I'm kidding. But I've been at GitLab. I've been at GitLab for about 9 months now, and I feel like using the tool GitLab to work remotely is just really efficient. Using issues and MRs, the transparency, the collaboration. And I'm like trying to struggle how other all remote companies work remotely without using GitLab. So I'm curious, I mean, have you seen organizations purchasing or using GitLab to manage and work remotely specifically?
I don't know about specifically, but I've definitely seen companies who were already using GitLab for the conventional things you would use GitLab for, eager to learn how to use more of it in new ways. So we've had a lot of existing clients come back to us, either our sales team or me directly, and say, hey, we're already a user of GitLab. Now our team's all remote. I think I remember your team at somewhere along the way mentioning that you're all remote. Like, what else can we learn from this? And we've been able to have some fascinating conversations on how we use it for project management outside of software engineering. And it's very eye-opening for people. And I think one of the most eye-opening things about us showing people how we use GitLab is the transparency that comes along with it. And that's something that they weren't necessarily seeking when they asked the question, but once they see it, you can't ever unsee it. And you can't ever think about working in any other way. And especially for chief people officers, there's this present question right now on how do we increase belonging? There's a bit of a social decay that comes with not being able to see someone in person over a year. And even the most seasoned veterans of remote are kind of feeling their social reservoir depleted. And it's giving us a great opportunity to show the connection and parallel between transparency and belonging. If you collaborate in a tool that's more transparent, it's more easy to see how others are working and what they're working on. There's a lower burden to entry and just having visibility. You just feel like you belong. Even if you don't do anything with that, if you don't provide any feedback or input, you don't switch teams, just knowing that it's there, knowing that you can get there creates this sense of calm and belonging. So that's been a fun conversation to have. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Last year, we did spin up a solutions page specific for remote teams. And we have a really awesome video that's embedded in that. And so we do share that around in webinars and panels and things of that nature. But yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity now. So many people know GitLab for our organizational design now. So many people instinctively associate the word remote with GitLab, and inevitably it's going to bleed over into our product. We actually have an OKR where we help sales conversations where we can, just to provide that remote input. And whether or not they use it for the project management, it's still useful for them to know that it is possible, and it gives them added transparency in their work.
Thanks, Darren.
Sure. Grant, you've got the next question.
Yeah, I was just wondering your thoughts about the recent Salesforce news that they announced they're going to be doing standard hybrid, as you say, which seems to be the standard approach now, either office, half not, or full remote. But what was interesting to me is that I found that as part of that announcement, they said that they're going they're going to offer fully remote, but they declared the 9 to 5 workday is dead. And I saw actually a lot of negative reaction to that particular piece, because that meant people obviously with more cynical hats on, which I can understand, means that it's not 9 to 5, so it'll be like 9 to 9 or 9 to X, or worse, it's a 24/7 on call scenario where the barriers of work life and home life are just completely disintegrated. I was wondering if you had any thoughts around that, or if you've seen that kind of response out there.
It's a totally valid concern. For a long time, people have had the commute in and the commute out as the effective barrier to where work starts and where it ends. So we were never really trained or conditioned to manage it on our own. At GitLab, we're managers of one, so I think we do a fairly good job at being able to manage that. But it's a looming crisis. And I think it's going to be on leadership to really reinforce and empower that you still need to manage your day and not just let it run over. And a lot of this is going to fall to leaders. Like if you expect your people to take 4 to 6 weeks of vacation and you set OKRs that require 52 weeks of work, what do you think is going to happen? Like self-preservation is going to kick in and they will end up working 52 weeks. You have to lead from the front and make sure that you set the stage that allows people to do that. I do think it's a concern, and it's something that we definitely want to approach in the content that we share and give people visibility onto how to do it well, so they don't default to essentially creating a bunch of burnout. Thanks for the time check, Stephanie. Zach, looks like you have the next question.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I know that we have a lot of really good remote content, and some of that content has been heavily shared and tons of downloads. So we generate a lot of leads with some of this remote content. I'm curious the opportunity that we might have to kind of bridge the all remote content to sales leads funnels. And I say that with the caveat of ensuring that we do it in a very soft approach and not forceful and just universally say, because you downloaded remote content, we want to sell to you. I think that's important to say, but also I do feel like there's probably some opportunity there. And I would be curious from your and Jessica's perspective, what that opportunity might look like.
And then Jessica's making a note here. She's thought deeply about this, so I'll cede the floor to her. What we're seeing is that although we're designing this for awareness, it's great content. It's highly actionable. It is exactly the thing that most people have been needing. It is the proverbial oasis in the desert. So what ends up happening is it creates this positive halo effect that if you help someone solve their remote problem, they just believe your brand. So like, oh, you can solve my collaboration problem and my DevOps problem and all of these other problems. So without us even categorizing it as that, we're getting a lot of halo effect. But I do want to let Jessica have the last say on this.
Yeah, I'm typing furiously, but I'll verbalize. So we've been having a lot of conversations about this for a long time. And knowing that we only have a minute left, I will quickly say that mostly we fit in at the top of the funnel awareness. And so it is difficult to bridge that to the sales funnel. But recently we've been seeing more of an opportunity to come in partway through the funnel where you're working with someone already and they want to know more about remote. And that's where we are happy to come and have conversation, help build a relationship, give people information that they need. And that is exciting for us to be part of the process of just building a good relationship with someone. So I think that's an opportunity to think about in the future, and we can see how to sort of make that work. Bridging the funnels is not something that we have figured out yet, but we are sciencing it out and we'll get there.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Looks like we are at time. This was an awesome and engaging conversation as always. Thanks all for joining. Check us out in the remote channel